Hello everybody, if it's your first time with us today, welcome, and if you've been around before, welcome back. Today we're continuing our series on tactics, and the next theme we're going to talk about are pins. So what are pins, and how can we use pins to win some of our games? So what are we looking at when we talk about pins? Well, let's take a look at our first position here today. We've got the black pieces. And you'll notice that we have this beautiful rook here on c8 that's putting a lot of pressure along the c-file. So what is a pin exactly? Well, a pin occurs when you have one piece that's blocking the attack of another piece so that one behind it doesn't come under attack. So for example here, let's look at this knight, right? This knight on c3. Our rook is attacking that knight, and behind that knight is white's queen. So if white moves this knight anywhere, if he plays a move like knight to e4, then black can chomp up that queen with rook takes c2. Typically, the attacking piece, in this case the rook, will be of lesser value than the pinned piece, or not the pinned piece rather, but the piece behind the pinned piece. So for example, the queen. The queen has more value than the rook, so white doesn't want to move his knight or else he's going to give up the queen. This isn't always the case. The piece behind the pinned piece could be hanging. There are other options that could occur, but this is kind of a typical thing that we see. So what do we do with a pinned piece? What's the way to take advantage of that? How is that good for us? I mean, right now, if we were just going to play rook takes knight, that's not any good for black. White can just take back either with the pawn or the queen, and he will have won a rook for the knight. So the key to pinned pieces, the first thing we always want to look for are ways to attack the pinned piece. How do we take advantage of a pinned piece? Attack it. So in this position, what's the best way that we can attack the pinned piece? Go ahead, take a look at it, see if you can find the answer. Here black is going to want to play the move b4. b4 attacks the knight with the pawn, and once again, like we said, if that knight moves away to another square, then the rook can take on c2. So white has to make a very hard choice. Is he going to move his knight and lose his queen, or is he going to simply make another move and allow us to take the knight? When we're attacking the piece that is pinned, you'll notice if we can attack it with a piece of lesser value, for example the pawn here is attacking the knight, that's going to make it even stronger for us. So if we can attack the pinned piece with a piece of lesser value, that gives us the chance to win material. So pin a piece and then attack it, and that's how we take advantage of it. Let's look at our next position. Well, in our next position, what's happening here? We'll see that black has a knight on e4, which is attacking white's bishop. If white moves the bishop, black also has another threat. He could potentially bring this knight to g3, which would be check, and that would be a nice little fork. He could be forking white's king and rook, and we don't want that to happen, so we don't really want to just move our bishop out of the way here. But remember, we're talking about pins today, so if we look at this position, where is there a pin? What piece in the position is currently pinned? Well, in the last position there was a rook pin. White does have a rook here going down this file, so it's true this pawn can't take on g5 if that were an option, but there's not really a way for this pawn to move right or left right now, so it is pinned, but there's a stronger one here, and that's the pin of the bishop on the g7 pawn. So if this g7 pawn were to move, then the king would be in check. We all know that we're not allowed to move our kings into check. That would be an illegal move. So this is a very specific type of pin. When you have a piece which is pinned to the king, we call it an absolute pin. An absolute pin means that you don't have the option of moving that piece even if you want to. In our last example, the knight was pinned to the queen. Yeah, we don't want to move that knight, we would lose our queen, but we still could. We still have the option to. In this example, the pawn is concretely pinned to the king. It's an absolute pin. Now, one thing to know about an absolute pin is that when a piece is absolutely pinned to the king, it essentially plays no role in defense. It doesn't do any good guarding the squares it's guarding because, like we said, it can't move. So white has a way here that he can take advantage of this absolute pin. Think about that for a moment. See if you can find the move white wants to play here. So the winning move for white here, this may look a little odd if you haven't seen before, but we're going to play the move rook takes h6, and oh no, look at that, it's checkmate. The king's under attack. He has no squares that he can go to. And what's going on here? Well, this pawn on g7 cannot take the rook on g6 because of the absolute pin from the bishop. Remember, that piece which is absolutely pinned takes basically no part in defense. It can't move at all. So we can capture the things that it's defending and not even have to worry. So that's something to bear in mind. When a piece is absolutely pinned, it cannot help in defense. So always look for ways to take advantage of that. What's going on in our next position? Well, once again, we have the white pieces in this position, and things are looking a little bit dangerous. Black has doubled rooks on the f file, and they're exerting a lot of pressure here on white's position. They're attacking this bishop that's on f2, and if we were to move the bishop on f2, they could even take the bishop that's behind it on f1. However, white has a way here that he can stop black dead in his tracks. So where can we create a pin to tie down the black pieces in this position? Well, this time it's going to be another bishop pin. We're going to play the move bishop to c4. The bishop now attacks the rook, and once again, it's an absolute pin. So even though black would love to come down and play rook takes f2, he's stuck dead in his tracks. This rook cannot move, and white can win it on the next move, or potentially even pile on it. So what do we do when we have a pinned piece? How do we take advantage of it? Attack the pinned piece, remember? So let's say black just plays a waiting move like h6. How can we take further advantage of the pin? Attack it again. Rook to a7. Put yet another attacker on that pinned piece. That's the best way to take advantage of a pin. Alrighty. Now let's look at a little bit more advanced pins, some other things that are going on here. Now we're flipping back to the black side of things. We've got the black pieces here. And white has a lot of play on this A file. He's got two rooks over on this side of the board. His queen is maybe eyeing the f8 square. So we have to watch out, see if there's any tactics that white could have attacking against our rooks and kings. Once again, black has these lovely rooks on the f file, keeping white's king in the corner and putting pressure on the bishop on f1. And how can black take advantage of a pin in this position here to really blow apart white's position? What move can black play? Well, in this position, black has another deadly move, and that's going to be bishop captures h3. Now, what's going on here? There's a lot of things happening, right? Well, the g-pawn is pinned. The queen is holding it to the king. There's an absolute pin, so white cannot play the move g takes h3. Now, white is defending g2 with the bishop on f1, and black would like to be able to play the move queen takes g2 with checkmate. So there's another way that we can take advantage of a pinned piece, and that's by using another tactic we'll talk about in another video, which is called removing the defender. So not only can we attack the pinned piece, but we can remove the defenders of the pinned piece. So black's real threat here is that if it were his move, he would want to play the move rook takes f1 check. After rook takes f1 check, White would either have to move his king to g2, or he could capture back. Rook takes f1. And now the pawn on g2 will not be defended, and black can deliver checkmate. Queen takes g2 checkmate. So that's what black wants to have happen. Is there anything white can do to defend? Does he have any last-minute ideas? Well, he can start by giving a check here. He can play rook takes f8. And now, what should black do? How should black recapture this rook? What's the correct way to do that? There's there's really only two options. If we take with the king, the queen is guarding, so we can't do that. We have to take with either the knight or the rook. Why is one of these really bad? Well, let's look at the bad one first here. If we take with the rook, suddenly it's white who has the potential to maybe get an attack going. Maybe he can defend a little bit longer. He has a move like bishop c4. Bishop c4 will be check. And now the king will have to move further away to the corner. And the defensive idea here is that then white can even play bishop takes g7 check, a sacrifice, but it's going to open up space for him to come back and defend the g2 square by playing a move like either rook a2, or he can move his queen back to defend and stop black's tactical idea. So black should play the move knight takes f8. And after knight takes f8, what's our threat again? What do we want to do as black? Well, we want to play that move, rook takes f1, and how can white defend here? Unfortunately, there's no way for white to bring another defender to the g2 square. His queen is locked out of the position. He can't get anywhere. The b7 pawn would stop if it tries to go to a8. The bishop blocks either the rook or the queen from coming to a2 to defend. There's only one more check white could give. He can take the knight, but it would just be a desperation check to keep the game going a little longer. No matter what white does here, black is going to sacrifice this rook and deliver checkmate. So there's a nice winning game for black, taking advantage of that absolute pin on g2. Let's look at one more position here. We're getting a little bit more advanced with our pins as we go, so if they're getting harder, don't worry. But what's happening in this last position for white? Well, white is actually down in exchange here. Black has 2 knights, white has 2 bishops. Black has 2 rooks, and white has the rook and the knight. So white is down roughly in exchange. The pawns are even, and each side has a queen. However, black's position is very tied down, and white can make a move here to tie it down even further. So if it's white's move, what move can white make to pin a piece and put even more pressure on the black position? Well, hopefully you found the move bishop to b2. And after bishop b2, things are very dangerous for black. The bishop is now pinning the knight on f6 to the queen on g7. So if the knight on f6 moves, we can take the queen. And black is in a very precarious situation. What can he do? We know that he can't move the knight. That would be bad. If black tries to move his queen, it will actually cause another pin. Let's say black played a move like queen g6, which would release the pin on the knight. That would be nice, right? Well, now his knight on e8 is pinned, and why is that? Well, black has his rook attacking the knight, and indirectly the rook behind it if the knight moves, and also his queen is attacking the rook. So that would be 2 attackers on the rook, and if the black queen moves, it'll only be defended once by the king. So if the queen moves, it escapes one pin, but creates another. We've got a position of pins going on here. And also, if that queen moves, what can white do? How can he take advantage? Let's go ahead and show that. Queen to g6. Well, the way to do this is once again combining those ideas we talk about. We're attacking the pinned piece. This bishop is attacking it. The rook's keeping it pinned. How else can we do it? Remove the defender of the pinned piece. So bishop takes f6. We already mentioned if knight takes f6, queen takes f8. Oh no, that would even be checkmate. So black has to play queen takes f6, and now this knight is only defended once. We can play a move like rook takes e8, and we've won a piece. We've got that knight. So black can't move his queen in this position when we go back a few moves. The rook can't move, it's stuck. If the king moves, it will have the same problem as the queen moving. That would introduce another pin, so black doesn't want to do that. This rook here on b7, well, it doesn't have a lot of places it can move. d7 and e7 are covered. Black could play the move rook to c7, but if he does that, how does white take advantage? What do we do with the pinned piece? We attack it, right? So which of white's pieces is not participating in the attack? The knight on f2. So we can play the move either knight g4 or knight e4 and attack one more time this knight on f6, and black's position is going to fall apart. There is no adequate defense for black after knight to e4. Something is going to give. If he takes this knight, the bishop will take the queen. If the queen moves to a square like g6, now this is being attacked even more times. We already showed how it doesn't work for black. So black will lose material here. So the rook move doesn't work. What's the last try black has? He can't move either rook, he can't move the queen, he can't move the f6 knight, he can't move the king. His position is tied down. Well, there's only one other piece he can try, and that would be the knight on e8. So he has two options. The first would be knight to c7 after bishop b2. So let's see what happens if knight to c7. This looks dangerous, right? Now black is counterattacking. He has a fork on the rook and the bishop. However, once again, we can use the principle of removing the defender. The pin has been released over here. This bishop still keeps a pin on the f6 knight. And we can trade everything down to win. So how do we do that? Rook takes f8. Only move, queen takes f8. Queen takes f8. Only move, king takes f8. And now this f6 knight is not defended. Do we want to take it right away? One more in-between move for white. Bishop c6, and now there's a double attack. The bishop attacks the rook on b7, the other bishop attacks the knight on f6, and black will have to choose to give up one of these pieces. He moves one or the other, and white will capture the other piece. Now white has 3 pieces against black's 2. So knight to c7 doesn't quite work for black here, though at least it's not maybe as bad as some other options. What's black's last possible defense? Knight to d6. And what's going on in this one? Well, black is attacking the bishop here, and he's also exposed your rooks to one another, so they're attacking. We can't necessarily trade everything down like we did the last time, because now the queen's attack on f8 is blocked by the knight on d6. However, what we can do here is we can play the move queen simply takes on d6. This looks like we're sacrificing a rook, right? Well, what's our follow-up after rook takes rook? Guess what? By taking that knight on d6, we're attacking the pinned piece. When we have the pinned piece, what do? We attack it. And now we can win some material back. Bishop takes knight, attacking the queen. And after the queen moves, let's say he plays a move like queen to g6. Now, white has this nice little move, bishop to c6 in the position. Black has one last attempt at defense here. Rook to a1 for check. White simply wants to move away because now it's white who's pinned. So if we play bishop takes a1, Then we're going to lose our queen. Queen to h2, or king to h2 rather. And what's going on? Well, now maybe black's going to get away, right? His rook over here is under attack. Well, the problem is this rook is still under attack as well. This rook cannot come back to the 8th file, and so after he moves, like maybe rook to a7, now white has back rank threats. Oh no, look, he can play queen to d8, and it's checkmate. That's all she wrote. So all of that, a lot happening in that position, but what was the key to that? What was the key move that got white back in the game from down the exchange? Bishop to b2. Create those pins, tie your opponents down, attack the pins, remove the defenders. If you have an absolute pin, remember, it can't help out in the defense. Take advantage of that and use pins in order to tie up your opponents and create some real havoc on the board. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing you pin it and win it in your games to come.